Afternoon. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Mike Garvin, and I'm a professor at Virginia Tech, and I'm one of the directors of the regional centers for the Build America Center, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to our Modernizing Infrastructure webinar series. And today we're very fortunate to have with us representatives from the Gordie Howe International Bridge. We've got Heather Grondin and Grant Hilbers to tell us about this important and fascinating project. So I am going to go ahead and turn things over to Heather and Grant. But I will say, if you have questions about the presentation, please type them into the chat. I will monitor that during the presentation, and then we'll address those questions at a point in time that makes sense. All right. Well, Heather, Grant, take it
Great,
away.
great. Thank you. Well, I'll get started. And thank you very much for having us participate today. As noted, it's our pleasure to give you a bit of an overview of the Gordie Howe International Bridge, where we're at in terms of overall construction and opening, but really focusing on some of the benefits that are coming as a result of this project. So just getting started, why? The Windsor-Detroit Trade Corridor, where the Gordie Howe International Bridge is located, is historically the busiest commercial land border crossing between the U.S. and Canada. Nearly 30% of all total bilateral trade that moves between the two countries moves right here at this very crossing. And it's very difficult for us to understate how important this specific corridor is to the economies of both the US and Canada. Canada is the number one trading partner for many US states, and that does include the states immediately in the area of the Midwest and down the center of the United States. In general, this region is home to a strong manufacturing center, and there's new opportunities as related to EV and e-commerce growth. And many jobs on both sides of the border specifically rely on this trade corridor being as strong and robust as it possibly can be. So, what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve with a new bridge and related border infrastructure is ensuring that trade can move efficiently and effectively through this corridor, not today, not just tomorrow, but over the very long term. And with the new border infrastructure, what we will be achieving is redundancy or crossing options in this important trade corridor that is currently supported through one other bridge that allows for commercial and passenger traffic, and an international tunnel that is primarily for passenger traffic. Provide for improved border processing. So really looking at how border processing has changed in the almost 100 years since the last international crossing has opened at this corridor, and ensuring that we have the space and the technology that reflects how trade moves today and the opportunity to increase and invest into more processing in the future. Having capacity for current traffic, but also looking ahead to how traffic can evolve and increase over time, and having the capacity to achieve that. And finally, one of the best benefits of the infrastructure that we're creating is highway to highway connectivity. So recognizing that stopping and starting of traffic, having border-bound traffic mingled with local traffic doesn't really ultimately benefit anyone. So having that highway to highway connectivity, having a separation of traffic, does support that efficiency that we're looking to achieve throughout this project. So just one last note, I did want to identify really the complex structure under which we're delivering the Gordie Howe International Bridge project. Um, Grant, my organization, the Windsor Detroit Bridge Authority, is kind of nestled there in the middle of this org chart. We're a Canadian Crown Corporation, so while we do report to the federal government of Canada, we function very much like a private sector company with a board of directors that oversees our operations. We have a project agreement that is a signed contract between ourselves and our private sector partner, Bridging North America, who's responsible for the design and construction, which we oversee. And they're also responsible for portions of the operations and maintenance of the project, which again, we oversee as ultimately the bridge operator. We report into the Government of Canada, and we also have very strong partnerships with other government agencies in Canada, in the US, at the state level, the federal level, and as well as working very closely with governments at the provincial level. And then finally, we do have an international authority, which is another oversight body that is comprised of representatives from Michigan and representatives from Canada that oversee again our operations and our compliance with our project agreement. And that's a very important body, recognizing that the Gordie Howe International Bridge is owned by both Canada and the state of Michigan. So having that international authority that represents both ownerships is a critical component in how we do deliver on this project. With that, I will hand it over to Grant to start getting into a little bit more detail about the project itself.
Thank you, Heather. So to start off, I'd like to talk a little bit about the project. It's being delivered as a P3 contract. In total, it's a $6.4 billion Canadian project that was awarded in 2018, and it's comprised of four components: the interchange with 75, Interstate 75, U.S. port of entry, which will be the largest port of entry along the northern border, the bridge, which usually gets most of the attention here, and the Canadian port of entry. Each of these four components probably meets most people's definition of a mega project on its own. So we've when you couple these all together, we believe we have one of the most complex infrastructure projects in North America right now that we're very close to completing. The bridge itself will have three lanes in either direction, three US bound, three Canadian bound. We have the dynamic signage on the bridge, so we can actually move the traffic as demand changes. The bridge, the clear span on this bridge, it's the cable stayed bridge, is half a mile or 2,800 feet, which notably makes this the longest cable stayed bridge in North America by a considerable margin. Worldwide, I think we always lose count on where we are, but we're somewhere. We may still be breaking the top 10, but certainly in North America, this is the longest cable stay bridge. The towers themselves on this bridge are about 722 feet, which rival the tallest building in downtown Detroit. So this bridge itself has changed the skyline in Detroit and in Windsor. The approach bridges are comprised of nine spans each in the US and Canada. And the piers for those approach bridges range from 8 feet to 100 feet tall. So the approach bridges themselves are also significant structures. That brings abutment to abutment the length of this bridge of 2.5 miles. Moving to the Canadian port of entry. As I mentioned earlier, the U.S. one is the largest port of entry along the northern border. This Canadian port of entry is also the largest Canadian port of entry, land port of entry along the border. It's approximately 130 acres in size. It will have 24 primary inspection lanes divided between commercial and traveler lanes. So 12 of those lanes are dedicated to commercial. A few of the lanes on the traveler side are flexible, but can accommodate either buses, trucks, or travelers. Included on this site are 13 secondary inspection docks and a large-scale imaging facility. So basically, a truck-sized X-ray machine to examine cargo that's coming into Canada. All of these features have been put together to create the most efficient border crossing that we could, locating all of the inspection resources that you would need on one site. For expedited traveling, there are provisions for Nexus and Fast, which is the commercial version of Nexus, to ensure that travelers can and commerce can move quickly. All of the toll lanes for this overall crossing are located in Canada. So we have eight in either direction, and they've been designed with a modern approach so that they're flexible. We can take different types of payment. Some of the lanes are completely automated, again, to create a very efficient crossing. On site, in addition to the Canadian Border Service Agency, we also have the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So, livestock crossing through or agricultural goods crossing through will have on site staff for inspection. Moving to the US port of entry, it's located in southwest Detroit and it's approximately 167 acres in size. We often get questions on why the sizing on the two facilities is different. These facilities were constructed for a single purpose, and that's for agencies to occupy and operate out of. So each of these projects, even though they're two ports of entry, are unique in themselves because they are really customized for the agencies that are using them. On the US side, we have 36 primary inspection lanes and 28 secondary inspection docks, along with also full-scale imaging facilities. Just like the Canadian side, there's processing capability for hazardous materials, and the entire crossing has been designed to handle oversized loads. They're designated livestock processing facilities on this site. So again, similar philosophy, everything's located on the one property so that we can have the most efficient crossing. And you've got multiple agencies that will occupy this facility to facilitate commerce, including U.S. Customs and Border Protection, USDA, Fish and Wildlife, and the Food and Drug Administration, all having offices on site. I-75 was also subject to extensive reconstruction to tie into the port of entry. So there are a number of elevated bridges that were constructed for this component, along with reconstruction of a large section of I-75. Notably, this portion is a design build transfer, while the other three components are part of the concession period, the 30-year concession period, as part of the overall contract. These were all grouped together to make sure that we had one uniform approach to constructing this crossing. The project is progressing well. We're at about 99% completion of construction, and we expect an opening as soon as early 2026. As standard practice on these projects go, even though construction is winding up, we're still working very closely with our private sector partner to complete commissioning in testing to ensure that all of the systems work as intended. There's extensive intelligent transportation devices installed from I-75 all the way to the highway in Canada to make sure that the entire crossing can be monitored and efficiently managed. So while that's we're going through those commissioning and quality checks to make sure that everything's completed as construction wraps up. Again, we expect to be completed shortly. I'll pass it back to you, Heather.
Great. Thank you, Grant. So, we went over some of the transportation benefits that we'll achieve with the Gordie Howe International Bridge, but this project has always been more than the transportation behind it. And, we're really early in the planning process for the Gordie Howe International Bridge. The governments who have been part of this project have identified that it provides a very significant opportunity to leverage a major infrastructure undertaking to invest in the environment and in the communities that are hosting the bridge itself during the construction phase and over the long term when we're in operations. So through this project, we've been able to integrate a series of benefits that have really been tailored and reflective of the region where we're located and have been the result of extensive consultation and engagement efforts, really that started around 2001, 2002, when the earliest conversations about this project started. So to have really a true impact on the community, we look to accomplish this through a very robust community and stakeholder engagement and consultation approach. And early in this project, we set about 10 key objectives for all of our engagement opportunities. We wanted to build trust and then reinforce that trustful relationship with well-respected stakeholders in the region. We recognize the national importance of this project, but also recognize that it had a very key local importance and wanted to tap into that local pride that people would take in this bridge. We wanted to ensure that we fostered dialogue and pursued shared goals between us as the bridge owners or the bridge operators with our private sector partner, Bridging North America, as well as with our external stakeholders. We sought to generate positive awareness of the project, so ensuring that people were always aware of or informed of the status of what we were going on, of what was going on. And through that, we provided prompt information, accurate information, and timely and meaningful information to the public and our stakeholders. We also always wanted to ensure that we were seen as a unified project partners. So amongst all of the owners, everyone that you saw in that organizational structure, that we had one unified voice whenever we were speaking publicly. And that did sometimes lead to some contentious conversations behind the scenes, but we needed to ensure that we would achieve consensus and present that consensus publicly. Have really active communications that and identify key project activities that would improve the quality of life for those in and around the project, which I'll talk a little bit more later. And then ensure that we address concerns head on, have active listening, and find solutions to people's problems. And then always ensure that we recognized our role as a community partner and as a long-term member of the communities with which we will be serving. Our stakeholders on this project are far and wide. I think our stakeholder list has in excess of 5,000 individual names included, and that did encourage us to look at stakeholder and community engagement in a broader lens, identifying specific tactics for each different stakeholder group. So here on this slide, you'll see that we had specific activities for businesses, specific activities for youth, regular touch points with elected officials, um, regular touch points and meeting opportunities with adjacent residents, opportunities to engage specifically on community benefits. And again, I'll talk about that later. And then being very open to the general public. And as noting on that, having that multiple ways for the community to engage directly with us, recognizing that different community members want to engage with us in different ways. And then what was also very, very interesting on this project is given that it was international, we needed to look at how the communities on the US side versus the communities on the Canadian side may want to engage with us differently, may have different priorities, may have different means of communication or different values that are a higher priority to them. So we did need to recognize the differences in the communities and adjust our tactics and create new tactics that reflect directly related to those different types of communities. All right, so back over to Grant to talk about some of our project outcomes.
So on this project, we've integrated sustainability into every phase of this project. Just to note, the initial work on this project started in 2000. So we are hitting 25 years from initial planning to execution, which I think is a testament to all of the people that pushed this project along at those various phases. So very challenging project when you have all of these goals in an international project. Despite this being obviously a transportation project that was designed to meet the needs of the communities, given that this is the first crossing built constructed in the area in about 100 years. Rather than just seeing it as just a transportation project, we also balanced the needs to invest in the environment and the community and the region that that was hosting this crossing. The project is integrated sustainability considerations in every phase through planning, integration, and contractual requirements, all the way through long-term operations. So this graph really shows that overall cycle. There was a robust binational environmental set of environmental studies completed, which involved Canada and the US at the federal levels, as well as the province of Ontario and the state of Michigan. So, if you want to get into a complex environmental assessment, this is the place to go to. This included more than 300 public and stakeholder consultations, and also addressing that on the Canadian side, where we are adjacent to some very significant environmental receptors. A number of factors were analyzed. So some of them are traditional, like air quality, protection of the community, protection of cultural resources. So the kind of things that you see in the environmental studies that are done on all of these major projects. But we also looked at regional mobility improvement and construction, the cost and constructability issues. So really having an integrated approach to both the design, construction, and sustainability community goals. In total, there were 450 different requirements that were identified out of those studies that had to be met. So a very significant number of commitments made, and I'll be happy to say we're wrapping up the last of those commitments in these final this final year of construction. So as I mentioned, the project agreement ties into binational environmental studies, new legislation, environment standard environmental regulations. Given the complexity of this issue, incorporating sustainability and social components had to be identified as a high priority early on. So this is not just an add-on after the fact. These concepts were integrated from planning all the way through execution, which I think is the only way that you can really pick up on all of these things and execute what we believe to be an example of how to do these kind of projects. Among the key things that we've included here are, all of the commitments in the environmental study. We included a requirement in the project agreement that our project partner, our private sector partner, not only develop an environmental management system, but also get that certified to 14,001. And we believe that was, yielded dividends over the course of this project. We required LEED certification on the buildings, LEED Silver, the buildings on both the ports of entry, and also Envision Silver was required. We managed to achieve Envision Platinum. Envision is the heavy civil comparator to LEED for buildings. We also committed to consultation with the public, Indigenous people, regulatory agencies, and other stakeholders through the life of the project. So that didn't just begin and end in planning, but that's continued throughout, largely led by Heather's wonderful group and supported by myself. And also something that Heather will touch on in more detail is the inclusion of a community benefit plan. One of the very interesting things about this project is there was actually legislation passed in Canada to make remove some of the permitting requirements related to species at risk and waterways, but require plans to be put together. So it was an intention to move the project forward, but also created a self-management program that we had to put in place. Moving on to some sustainable design features. We believe that we've incorporated, the best practices in sustainability here. Always, we were looking at the fundamental requirements of contributing to a cleaner environment, protecting the communities, and also addressing the potential impact for climate change and conserving resources for future generations. Based on those principles, we came up with a number of things, that, including the ones I've already mentioned on LEED certification and some of the certifications. Um, we included numerous features into the building, some as direct as LED lighting, which, when you're talking about LEED in a modern building, that seems to be straightforward. But we also have a peregrine box included in the bridge to naturally manage potential pest birds. All of the landscaping was intended to be native, drought resistant, so it was low maintenance, but also matched up with the native environment around there. And we included extensive management of the stormwater runoff from on both sides of the border. One of the most important features that came about after we'd started design is inclusion of a multi-use path for cycling. So we've got a completely independent path for cyclists and pedestrians, and that actually never cross traffic. They lead to separate customs facilities on both sides of the border, and also tie into uh, multi-use paths on either side of the border. So, frankly, I think that's one of the most unique features of this crossing, and we hope that lots of people use it when we open up shortly. Um, when you look at some of the challenges that we had, just based on location of this project, on the Canadian side, we're adjacent to a unique ecosystem, and we had to manage around a significant number of species at risk. The lands on the Canadian POA are surrounded by a sensitive prairie ecosystem, which includes more than 44 species at risk and over 160 rare plants and species. This prairie complex is probably the highest concentration of species at risk in Ontario. So it's a very unique ecosystem, given that we're at the southernmost portion of Canada. But it happens to be adjacent to also a mega project. So we incorporated a number of features to protect that ecosystem, and we also enhanced the buffer zone between the Canadian port of entry and that area. Extensive mitigation protections were put in place prior to construction, during construction, and also after construction. So we have got wildlife exclusion fence as far away from the port of entry as possible to create that layer of exclusion to make sure even during operations we don't have impacts. Part of this was achieved through our environmental management system. As I indicated, as one of the requirements of the contract, we had to have an EMS that was ISO 14001 certified. And through that, there were all kinds of plans developed that made sure that the management of species risk, the management of dust, the management of all kinds of construction activities were well described. Everybody on the site knew what to do, and those management plans were used throughout construction to make sure those goals that I talked about earlier were actually integrated into the construction activity, which, at times during peak construction, we had about 2,500 different people on site. So establishing that program and having those plans in place was key to executing that kind of program. In addition to that, we've got general construction considerations incorporated throughout our documents, all the way from limiting noise, which ties to bylaws on both sides of the border, but also we had enhanced requirements on top of bylaws. We had vibration monitoring anywhere that we were impacting buildings or residents. Erosion and sedimentation controls were incorporated on both sides. And we had extensive archaeological work done on either side of the border. This area has also got some very sensitive archaeological areas given the history of both Detroit and Windsor, and the age of the area that we were working in. Ongoing public consultation was key. one of the innovative things that we incorporated into this project on the U.S. side was a cooperation agreement with the local Michigan State Environmental Authority, which is called Eagle. So we had ongoing meetings with Eagle to talk about all of the remediation work that had to take place on the U.S. port of entry. And through those interactions, we developed a comprehensive air monitoring plan to turn what was essentially a brownfield into the new port of entry, but including a very extensive air monitoring program to ensure that we were protective of the neighboring community as all of that work was undertaken. We've completed a number of presentations on that particular cooperation. It's something that on many projects you would find kind of a foreign concept that you have the state regulator with you at the table as you're developing plans. But it really went a long way to deal with some very, very complex issues given the age of the properties and the heavy industrial use on the properties that we've incorporated into the U.S. port of entry. So this layered idea of layered approach to all of these considerations went a long way to make sure that we were being respectful of the community and made sure that everything that we were doing um, uh, was appropriate given the nature of the area and the environmental justice population that we had in pockets around the construction site. And with that, I'll take the introduction to these flyovers are probably the most fun thing that we incorporate in presentations. But I'll do the introduction. We've got a video to include to show you the extent and frankly the beauty of the project that we're executing right now.
All right. So I'll go over some of our social outcomes that have also been a result of the project to date. So first, looking at the economic benefit that has come from really construction. So starting in 2018, and then looking up to about 2020, we engaged Deloitte to complete an economic contribution analysis for us for that time period. And through that, it was identified that this project had contributed over $1.9 billion Canadian to the Michigan gross domestic product, with the vast majority of that going directly to the area in and around the city of Detroit, and supported over 12,000 jobs in Michigan, and again, centered mostly in Detroit. On the Canadian side, 1.3 billion to Ontario's GDP, and of course, the majority of that directly in the Windsor metropolitan area, with 1.3 billion of that in the Windsor area, and over 10,000 jobs again to Ontario, focused mostly in the Windsor area. We will continue to assess and analyze the economic contribution of this project once we're open, and anticipate seeing again very similar numbers. Also, through this analysis, it was identified that with the construction and then the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge, it's anticipated that new businesses will come to the region, both on the Windsor and Detroit sides, specifically in the area of hospitality, logistics, and warehousing. Grant referenced this, but the multi-use path is one of the highlights of the Gordie Howe International Bridge. It will connect both sides of the border and provide another means, a supportive, an active transportation way for people to get across the border. And I think one of the reasons why this aspect of the bridge is so special is because it was completely community driven. As we were out doing community consultation in 2015, 2016, really the communities on both sides of the border rallied together and spoke to us about how critical it was to include this multi-use path early in the design and construction phase, recognizing that we really couldn't go back later and include this path. And when we considered this and did consultation with the border agencies and made the decision to include the path, some of the criticism that we received at the time was there were really no trails in the area that would connect to the bridge and the multi-use path. However, in the years since then, and in cooperation with the City of Windsor and the City of Detroit, many new trail networks have been established and extended, some of which we have funded through our community benefits plan, and others that both the cities have funded, so that it is now a much broader regional trail transportation network that has been installed with the Gordie Howe International Bridge right in the center of it. And one really interesting aspect of this is the Gordie Howe International Bridge is now the first international crossing that is part of the Trans-Canada Trail, which is a 28,000 kilometer trail network that goes across the country. And this is the first part that also connects into the United States. We referenced this a few times during this presentation, but really critical to this project has been our community benefits plan. There's been two components to our plan, a workforce development and participation strategy, which has been all about providing opportunities for local workers and local businesses to contribute to the project, and our neighborhood infrastructure strategy, which is a $23 million community infrastructure investment program that focuses directly in on priorities that we've heard from the community through consultation. Now, a few stats and outcomes from our workforce development and participation strategy. Over 15,000 people have been oriented to work on the project, and a number that we're very proud of is that 41% of those people have been from either Detroit or from the Windsor-Essex region. We've had over 850 apprentices or pre-apprentices assigned to work on the project through unions that have been working together on this. We have had over 430 cooperative learning experiences with post-secondary educational institutions on both sides of the border, and not just in the Windsor-Detroit area, but further out within the region. And we've had over 290 local businesses engaged to provide either goods or services many at low value contract amounts so that they could have an opportunity to directly participate. On the neighborhood infrastructure side, we've had over 60 initiatives that have moved forward through our community benefits plan with many, many positive outcomes to date. While some of these initiatives have been event focused and really of the time that they were delivered, many of them are also longer term programming investments or infrastructure investments that will continue to be in place well outside of the construction of the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Some of these initiatives include arts and culture programming, community art installation, historical films, and a cross-border historical tour. Over 1,200 trees and native shrubs have been either planted or distributed to local residents to have in their own yards, as well as environmental education programming, provided supports to hundreds of local entrepreneurs and small businesses, have provided funding and have implemented improvements to local parks, have provided significant funding to food security infrastructure and programming, including providing appliances to local food banks, funding for community meals, and funding for food distribution boxes, and also providing programming for youth and seniors. One of our most popular initiatives is our Delray Home Improvement Program, which was a $4 million investment in providing home repairs for eligible homes in the area of the U.S. side of the project, immediately adjacent to the U.S. port of entry. Over 100 residences received repairs that included things like roof repairs, new HVAC systems or improvements, and window replacements. We've also had our community organization investment initiative that over 6 years, this initiative has totaled $1 million and invested in 67 unique projects, ranging from small grants to funding for events and funding for minor improvements, and really focused on not-for-profit organizations that directly benefited or directly served the residents, again, immediately adjacent to where our project is located. Through this program, we've invested in providing new gym floors, providing healthy eating classes, green space reclamation, community engagements and support for sporting events, and grants for youth in sports. Critical to this whole initiative was having a community benefits committee made up of community members who have provided us with direct insight into community needs and priorities and have helped us specifically identify where funding would go. Just a final component I wanted to speak to is also our visual art program. The purpose of our visual art program is to create memorable, high quality works of art, really consistent with the international importance of this bridge, and to help celebrate and promote the creativity and the friendship between Canada and the US. Our visual arts program is comprised of three different components. Public art that is integrated into the project itself. So this includes a building facade, an standalone Indigenous art piece at the Canadian Port of Entry, and aesthetic lighting programs. Commemorative art, which recognizes this specific region's contribution to the Underground Railroad, and then art in the community that has been part of our community benefits plan. We have had very positive reaction to our visual arts program, and it has provided the opportunity to have spin-off opportunities with local art museums. With that, this is our final slide. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. Here's our website and our social media channels. Great way to stay up to date on the project is following us on social media. That concludes our presentation. I'll just stop sharing here and happy to take any questions.
So questions that anyone in attendance might have. Maybe while folks are thinking about that, I do have a question. So, when you've got a binational arrangement here, obviously with a complex governance, kind Could you maybe talk a little bit more about the particularly the structure of you've got the Canadian government, the U.S. federal government, the state and local governments involved in that oversight. How did that, I mean, how did that structure come about? I mean, so how did that agreement come to play? And yeah, I guess in an extension of that question is, once let's say the project goes into operations, does that oversight continue? So I guess that's a question I have.
I'll tackle that one. So, what's really interesting about this project is from the very first days, and Grant mentioned this, the initial conversations about this project started in 2000. And right off the bat, the governments of Canada, the US, Ontario, and Michigan formed what they called the Border Transportation Partnership. And they recognized together that there was a need to look at this region. So that partnership really started, it was a togetherness right from day one, which I think was really critical to be able to help us move along in a way throughout this project. Another interesting aspect of this project, it is entirely funded by Canada. And the crossing agreement that was signed between Canada and Michigan in 2012 sets out the overall framework of that partnership. Both Canada's payment, how the toll revenue goes back to Canada in reflection of that investment in the project, but also very, very clearly defines the roles and responsibilities of all parties. And that document was negotiated over a length of time, spent a lot of time back and forth to ensure that it achieved the key principles of the project, but also respected everyone's roles in the project and then define that overall oversight. And to your question about oversight continuing, that Canada Michigan oversight does continue throughout the duration of the project. Well, actually, we stop becoming a project when we become an operating bridge. That oversight does continue, and our direct partnership in working with the state of Michigan does continue on as well. This project very much is a representation of partnership
Okay.
between the entities.
Thanks for the clarification. So there's a question up about Grant, you mentioned extensive intelligent transportation devices along the bridge. Could you give some examples of these systems, and did you face any challenges due to the binational security concerns of this project? So
Um,
multi-part
uh,
question there.
yeah, I'll start with the easy part. So as far as technology goes, we've got anonymized detection of Bluetooth signals from end to end. So we've got traffic time calculated from the time you leave I-75, the time you hit the 401 in Canada, down two different channels. So we actually separate commercial and traveler just naturally as you push through the customs area. And so we've got those signals. Those signals, along with some other data that we collect, are all processed, and we actually share them with transportation agencies in Ontario, in Michigan, as well as the border service agencies. So we are the collector, and we share information back and forth. In addition to that, we've got dynamic signage and messaging that we can actually send to those two transportation authorities, so that it's not just our crossing, but we feed intelligence from our crossing back into the wider highway network. And probably one of the most important thing, given the footprint of this site, is we've got an extensive camera network that ties into some artificial intelligence that is designed to automatically detect incidents. So if we have a car crash, that's supposed to be identified automatically, draws the attention into the traffic management center. So we have one traffic management center that covers the entire footprint of the project that we described. There'll be immediate alerts, cameras, the appropriate cameras will pop up. So among, those are really the key things that we've integrated in there to make this as efficient as an efficient crossing as possible, and also feedback into, our purpose is to draw traffic in and send back into the highway system. So that's what we're designed to do. As far as security concerns, yes, when you're dealing with this many entities and the nature of the crossing, those were all integrated. And what I could say is from the early days, we had all of the agencies, transportation agencies, border agencies, extensively involved in planning as well as development of our contract. So all of those concerns, security concerns, and requirements were integrated from day one. And that's the other set of stakeholders that we work with extensively. So many of the people involved from those agencies have been engaged from a long time ago, and that cooperation, those conversations, and assurance that they had input into the contract was really key to executing something as complex as this. So the infrastructure is the infrastructure. Doing this with this many agencies involved just adds to that complexity, and it's that planning and communication was key.
Okay. Thanks. Another question, going back to the outreach, could maybe describe some of the challenges that you faced and how you overcame these challenges, with obviously the different number of stakeholders you were dealing with on this project?
Yeah, for sure. So, a very easy challenge or, a very, minor, I don't want to say minor, but, a challenge that we need to overcome, for example, is language. So on the Canadian side, we have to comply with the Official Languages Act, which means everything we do is in English and French. The community that we were engaging with on the US side in Southwest Detroit is very much a Spanish speaking community. So French didn't do us much good on the US side, and quite frankly, didn't do us much good on the Canadian side because where we're located in Canada is very much primarily an English speaking part of the country. So while not a requirement under legislation, we took the step to ensure that all of our public materials were available in English, French, and Spanish, and that at our public meetings, we would have a Spanish language interpreter available to help convey information to the residents. And then that was a very positive step ultimately for us in terms of building trust. And I think taking effort, taking the time to build trust was a critical step for us. At the onset, we just looked like, government coming in, building some big project. How could people trust that we were going to do things like put in the environmental measures that Grant spoke to, deliver, like listen to people and deliver community benefits that focused on priority? That was all based on trust. And to build some of that trust, examples like having interpreters, having very frequent meetings. We do public meetings on a quarterly basis. We still do those. We just last week had our 34th round of quarterly community meetings. And then we built very strong relationships with elected officials and community leaders. And we did that again through frequent meetings, being open, taking phone calls at any time of day, hearing concerns, working with Grant's team, the environmental team to respond quickly to those responses. So, really taking the action that reflected our commitments and doing that time and time again. And ultimately, that was built a lot of trust and helped us move through, I'd say, some of the more challenging times of construction, such as road closures and other types of activities that directly impacted people's day-to-day lives.
Okay, great. Thanks for that response. I have one more question, and unless the someone in the audience has a question. Um, so the various community benefits you talked about and so forth, are those being funded by the Canadian government or the local governments, relative? I mean, because obviously you've got a developer concessionaire here who's delivering the bridge and other aspects of the project, and it sounds like some of the, I guess, if I understood from Grant, the uh, that entity is doing, one of the terminals, but it will transfer, I guess, to either Michigan or Canada once it's done. Um, I guess who is funding all that, right? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, yeah. So, like all aspects of the project, it is ultimately funded by the Government of Canada. The Community Benefits Plan is a joint plan between our private sector partner, Canada, and I will say Michigan as well, because they were involved in every single step and do have approval rights over certain US aspects of the delivery of the plan. And so while our private sector partner would fund an initiative initially, it is then reimbursed through the Government of Canada. And it does work a little bit differently than maybe some other community benefits plans where you may see, a contractor or developer fund, let's say, a basketball court, and then in return get a tax break or access to property or approvals from a city government. That's not how ours worked. We already had those things. This was really a recognition that this project impacts people, and we needed to be responsible and accountable to that.
Thanks for sharing that.
Mhm.
Any other questions? I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so I wanna I want to again thank Grant and Heather for being with us today and giving us this terrific presentation about the Gordie Howe International Bridge. A lot of different dimensions, obviously, that went into making this project happen, and I'm sure everybody's going to be excited once it opens up here in the very near future. Um, with that, I'll sort of wrap things up. We will have another webinar in the Build America Center's webinar series, probably in February, and be about the Gateway program that's in the New York, New Jersey region. So we're looking forward to that. Just be on the lookout, through our newsletter and other channels for the dates and times for that. But again, I expect that will be in February. So again, I'll thank Heather and Grant. Thank everyone for joining us today. Hope you have a good rest of the day and a great holiday season.